Kyle Martinez floated in the small shuttle as it moved toward the massive space station. His hands were sweating inside his gloves, but he tried to stay calm. This was the moment Earth had been waiting for. After 30 years of sending radio signals into space, someone had finally answered. The station was huge, bigger than anything humans had ever built. It looked like a metal city floating in space with lights blinking everywhere. Ships from different worlds came and went like busy insects around a hive. "First time seeing something like this?" asked Captain Lisa Brooks from the pilot seat. She had been chosen to bring Kyle to this meeting because she was the best pilot Earth had. "Yeah," Kyle said, watching the alien ships. Some looked like giant crystals. Others moved like they were alive. "Hard to believe we're really here," Lisa nodded. "Took us long enough to get invited to the party. The invitation had come as a surprise." A message in perfect English had arrived at the International Space Agency 6 months ago. It said Earth could send one person to meet with the Galactic Council. Kyle had been picked because he spoke 5 languages and had studied every bit of information humans had about space. Their shuttle docked with a soft bump. Kyle took a deep breath and followed Lisa through the airlock. The hallway beyond was filled with strange smells and sounds. Creatures that looked nothing like humans walked past them. Some had too many arms. Others had no arms at all. A floating robot met them at the entrance. "Human Representative Kyle Martinez," it asked in a voice that sounded like music. "That's me," Kyle said. "Follow me. The council is waiting." They walked through corridors that seemed to go on forever. Kyle saw beings made of crystal, talking to creatures that looked like giant bugs. Fish-like aliens swam through tubes filled with water that ran along the ceiling. Everything was strange and wonderful. The meeting room was enormous. Hundreds of different creatures sat in groups around a central platform. Kyle felt very small as he walked to the designated spot for humans. There was only one chair. A being that looked like living crystal stood up. Its voice echoed strangely when it spoke. "I am Zethkar of the Vorthak Collective. You are from the world you call Earth, Classification 7 Delta." "Yes," Kyle said. "Thank you for inviting us." Zethkar's crystal body flashed different colors. "Your species shows basic intelligence. You have primitive fusion power and chemical rockets. This is acceptable for simple tasks." Kyle felt his heart sink. They were being looked down on already. Another alien spoke up. This one looked like a giant mantis with golden skin. "The mantis hierarchy requires agricultural worlds. Your planet could provide food resources." A third alien, shaped like a jellyfish but made of metal, floated closer. "The Zephyr Collective needs mining operations. Your asteroid belt contains adequate materials." Kyle realized what was happening. Earth wasn't being welcomed as an equal. They were being offered jobs as farmers and miners. "What about joining the council?" Kyle asked. The room fell silent. Then several aliens made sounds that might have been laughing. Zethkar's crystals dimmed. "New species must prove their worth over many centuries. Your people barely understand faster than light travel. You have no significant military force. Your technology is thousands of years behind council standards." "We could learn," Kyle said. "Humans are good at learning." "Perhaps," said the mantis alien. "In time. For now, we offer you a choice. Accept mining rights in Sector TB7739 or farming contracts in the Outer Rim. Both come with basic protection from the Council." Kyle looked around the room. Every alien seemed bored, like this meeting was just something they had to get through. Earth wasn't special to them. It was just another small world that could be useful. But Kyle had studied the political situation during the long journey here. The Galactic Council wasn't as united as it appeared. 3 major powers controlled most of the decisions. The Vorthak Collective controlled trade. The Mantis hierarchy had the biggest military. The Zephyr Collective controlled information and communication. Each group watched the others carefully. There were smaller groups too, but they rarely spoke up. They just went along with whatever the big 3 decided. "We need time to consider your offer," Kyle said. Zethkar's crystals flashed brighter. "Time? Your species requires immediate guidance. Without council protection, you are vulnerable to pirates, slavers, and worse threats." "What kind of threats?" Kyle asked. The mantis alien clicked its claws together. "The galaxy is not safe for primitive species. There are things in the dark spaces between stars that hunt the weak." Kyle felt a chill, but he kept his voice steady. "We still need time to discuss this with our leaders." "Very well," Zethkar said. "You have 1 standard cycle to decide. The council is generous, but we cannot wait forever." The meeting was over. Kyle was escorted back to his shuttle where Lisa was waiting. "How did it go?" she asked as they prepared to leave. "About as expected," Kyle said, watching the space station grow smaller through the window. "They think we're cavemen with rockets, are we?" Kyle thought about that. Compared to what he had seen, humans were incredibly primitive. But something bothered him about the whole meeting. The council operated like a machine. Everything was organized, official, and predictable. Every species seemed to have its place and role. "Maybe we are primitive," he said finally. "But I think that might be exactly what this galaxy needs." Lisa looked confused. "What do you mean?" "They've been doing things the same way for thousands of years. Same rules, same roles, same thinking. Nothing ever changes. They look at us and see weakness, but maybe they're missing something." "Like what?" Kyle watched a group of council ships flying in perfect formation. "Like the fact that sometimes the best solutions come from people who don't know what's impossible." During the long journey back to Earth, Kyle studied everything he had recorded about the meeting. He watched how the different alien groups interacted. He noticed how they spoke, how they moved, how they made decisions. By the time Earth came into view, Kyle had reached a conclusion. The Galactic Council was powerful, advanced, and completely set in its ways. They had grown comfortable in their roles and had forgotten how to adapt. That would turn out to be their biggest mistake. Earth might be a backwater world, but humans had something the galaxy had lost long ago. They had the ability to surprise everyone, including themselves. 6 months had passed since Kyle Martinez returned from his meeting with the Galactic Council. Earth had decided to accept the mining contract, but things in the galaxy had changed dramatically. Commander Jake Sullivan stood on the bridge of the human observation ship Pioneer, watching something that made his blood run cold. Through the view screen, he could see the remains of what had once been a thriving star system. 3 planets were gone, leaving only debris and twisted metal. "What could do something like this?" asked Lieutenant Sarah Johnson, his communications officer. Jake shook his head. "I don't know, but we need to find out." The call had come from the Galactic Council 3 days ago. It was the first time they had contacted Earth since the initial meeting. The message was brief and desperate. "Emergency situation. All available ships report to Proxima Sector immediately." When the Pioneer arrived, Jake found a massive fleet of Council ships surrounding the ruined system. But instead of the confident, organized force he expected, the aliens seemed confused and frightened. A transmission came through from a Vorthak command ship. "Human vessel, this is Fleet Commander Velketh. You should not be here. This area is extremely dangerous. We received your emergency call," Jake replied. "We came to help." There was a long pause. "Help? Your ship carries no weapons of significance. What help could you possibly provide?" Before Jake could answer, alarms started blaring throughout the fleet. On the view screen, something moved at the edge of the system. It looked like a dark cloud, but as it got closer, Jake could see it was made up of thousands of small objects. "Skarn swarm incoming," came a panicked transmission from somewhere in the Council fleet. "All ships prepare for battle formation Alpha 7. Jake watched in amazement as the alien ships moved into a perfect geometric pattern. Every ship had its assigned place, and they moved with mechanical precision. "It's like watching a dance," Sarah said. But Jake was focused on the approaching swarm. As a former military officer, he had studied many different fighting styles. What he saw coming toward them didn't move like any army he knew. The dark objects were ships, but they moved together like a school of fish or a flock of birds. They flowed around obstacles, changed direction instantly, and seemed to think as one mind. "Sarah, record everything," Jake ordered. "I want detailed scans of how those things move." The battle began with a massive exchange of energy weapons. The Council ships fired in coordinated volleys, their beams lighting up space like fireworks. But the Skarn ships moved like water, flowing around the attacks and striking back from unexpected angles. Jake watched as a group of Mantis hierarchy cruisers tried to hold formation while under attack. They followed their battle plan perfectly, but the Skarn anticipated every move. Within minutes, half the cruisers were destroyed. "Commander," Sarah called out, "I'm detecting some kind of communication signal between the Skarn ships. It's like they're all connected. Can you analyze it?" "Already working on it," said Dr. Amy Carter over the comm system. She was Earth's top xenobiologist, and Kyle had insisted she come on this mission. "Jake, I'm seeing something interesting." The Skarn move like a hive mind, but there's a delay in their coordination, about 0.3 seconds. Jake's military training kicked in. A delay? That means they're not truly instant. They need time to process and adapt. Exactly. But the Council forces are so predictable that the delay doesn't matter. The Skarn can anticipate what they're going to do. On the view screen, Jake watched another Council formation get torn apart. The aliens were brave and their ships were powerful, but they fought like they were following a textbook that was thousands of years old. "Amy, keep studying those signals," Jake said. "Sarah, get me a channel to the Council fleet." "Channel open. Fleet Commander Velketh, this is Commander Sullivan. Your formations aren't working. The enemy can predict your moves. Human, you do not understand galactic warfare. These formations have been successful for millennia. Not against this enemy. They think differently. Impossible. There is only one correct way to conduct fleet operations." Jake felt frustrated. The alien commander was so convinced of his methods that he couldn't see they weren't working. More ships died as Jake watched. The Council had superior firepower and numbers, but the Skarn moved like a living thing, always staying one step ahead. Then Jake had an idea. "Amy, you said the Skarn have trouble with unpredictable situations?" "That's right. Their hive mind is incredibly efficient, but it's built for patterns and logic. Random or chaotic behavior would confuse their coordination system. Sarah, patch me through to all human personnel." "Done. All stations, this is the commander. I want you to forget everything you know about proper procedures. We're going to try something completely crazy." On Earth, news of the battle was reaching the highest levels of government. President Mary Thompson sat in the Situation Room with her advisors, watching the live feed from the Pioneer. "Sir," said General Peter Ross, "our ship is moving away from the main fleet. Are they retreating?" The president asked. "I don't think so. Look at their flight path. It doesn't follow any military doctrine, I know." On the screen, they watched as the Pioneer began flying in what seemed like random patterns. It would dart toward the Skarn swarm, fire a few shots, then suddenly change direction and speed away. "What is Sullivan doing?" General Ross muttered. The answer became clear when Jake's voice came through the communication system. "All Council ships, if you want to survive, you need to break formation and start moving randomly. Don't follow any patterns. Just react to what you see." "Human, you are suggesting chaos," Velketh replied. "This violates all tactical principles." "Your tactical principles are getting you killed," Jake shot back. "Look around. Half your fleet is gone." More Skarn ships poured into the system. The dark swarm grew larger and more dangerous by the minute. Then something unexpected happened. One of the smaller alien ships, a Zephyr Collective Scout, broke away from its formation and started copying the Pioneer's erratic movements. Almost immediately, the Skarn attacking that ship began making mistakes. Their perfect coordination stuttered as they tried to predict movements that had no pattern. Dr. Amy Carter's excited voice came over the comm. "Jake, it's working. The hive mind is having trouble processing truly random behavior. Their coordination is breaking down locally." More ships began breaking formation. At first it was chaos. Ships collided, communication broke down, and the neat battle lines dissolved into a swirling mess. But something amazing happened. The Skarn, who had been winning easily, suddenly found themselves confused and disoriented. Their perfect swarm formation began to fragment as different parts of the hive mind received conflicting information. "All ships," Jake called out. "Keep it random. Don't let them predict what you're going to do next." The battle turned from a massacre into something resembling a fair fight. Council ships that had been running for their lives suddenly found they could strike back effectively. Jake smiled as he watched. A group of Vorthak cruisers execute a maneuver that would have horrified any military academy. They flew straight at the Skarn swarm, then scattered in all directions at the last second. The confused Skarn ships crashed into each other, trying to follow multiple targets. "Commander," Sarah called out, "we're getting messages from all over the galaxy. Everyone wants to know what we did. Tell them we stopped thinking like machines and started thinking like humans." By the time the battle ended, the Skarn swarm had retreated, leaving behind the first Council victory anyone could remember. But more importantly, the galaxy had learned something new. Species that had dismissed Earth as primitive were now asking for military advisors. The humans who had arrived in the galaxy as farmers and miners had just revolutionized warfare. But Jake knew this was just the beginning. If they could change how the galaxy fought, maybe they could change how it thought about everything else too. 3 weeks after the victory in the Proxima sector, Admiral Rachel Stone stood in the war room on Luna Station, looking at a holographic map of the galaxy. Red dots marked Skarn attacks. There were dozens of them, spreading like a disease across civilized space. "They're learning from our tactics," reported Colonel Dan Wright, Earth's new military liaison to the Council. "The random movement patterns worked once, but now they're adapting." Rachel nodded. She had expected this. The Skarn were intelligent even if they thought as one mind. "What about our other advantages?" "The Council species are still too rigid," Dan said. "They can copy what we did at Proxima, but they can't really improvise. When the Skarn change their tactics, the aliens go back to their old formation fighting." The door opened and Kyle Martinez walked in, now serving as Earth's official ambassador to the Galactic Council. Behind him came Dr. Amy Carter, who had become the galaxy's leading expert on Skarn behavior. "Bad news," Kyle said without greeting. "The Council is falling apart. 3 more systems have gone dark, and the member species are blaming each other for the failures." "What about our suggestions?" Rachel asked. Amy pulled up her own holographic display. "They're not listening. We've shown them how human tactics work, but they keep trying to turn our methods into rigid rules. They don't understand that the whole point is to not have rules." Rachel understood the problem. Humans had grown up on a world where survival meant adapting to constant change. Earth had ice ages, natural disasters, and thousands of different environments. Humans had learned to be flexible because rigid thinking meant death. But the galaxy's advanced species had been comfortable for too long. They had found successful patterns and stuck with them for thousands of years. Now when they needed to adapt, they didn't know how. "Ma'am," called Lieutenant Nick Hayes from the communication station. "We're getting a priority message from the Wolf 359 system. Skarn attack in progress. They're requesting immediate assistance." Rachel looked at the tactical display. Wolf 359 was a major system with 3 inhabited planets and over 2 billion people. It was also the location of the Council's largest military base. "How many ships do we have available?" she asked Dan. 12 destroyers, 3 cruisers, and the carrier Defiant, about a quarter of our total fleet. "And the Council forces?" "Over 300 ships, including their newest dreadnoughts." Rachel thought about the odds. The Council had overwhelming firepower, but she had seen how they fought. If the Skarn had adapted to counter human tactics, the aliens would be slaughtered. "Amy, what's your assessment of Skarn capabilities now?" The scientist brought up her latest analysis. "They've definitely learned from our previous engagement. But Jake was right about the processing delay. It's still there, but they've compensated by making their formations more flexible. They're still a hive mind, but now they can split into smaller groups that operate semi-independently. Weaknesses? They still think logically. Their adaptations follow predictable patterns. If we could do something truly chaotic, something that doesn't follow any logical progression, we might confuse them again." Rachel stared at the tactical display, thinking. Then she smiled. "Dan, have you ever heard of jazz music?" The colonel looked confused. "Yes, ma'am. Why?" "Get me Sergeant Maria Lopez, and tell our musicians to pack their instruments." An hour later, the human fleet jumped into the Wolf 359 system. What Rachel saw there was worse than she had feared. The Council fleet was in full retreat, their perfect formations shattered by Skarn swarms that moved like living smoke. "Admiral, this is Fleet Commander Zeth Kar," came a transmission from the alien flagship. "Human vessels, you must withdraw immediately. The enemy has adapted to your previous tactics. Your small force cannot succeed where we have failed." "Not planning to fight the same way," Rachel replied. "All human ships break off from the main fleet and form up on my position." On the bridge of the destroyer Defiant, Lieutenant Commander Nick Hayes watched his tactical display with growing confusion. The human ships were spreading out in what looked like a completely random pattern. "Commander," called his tactical officer, "what's our target?" "Wait for it," Nick said, remembering his training under Commander Sullivan. Rachel's voice came over the comm system. "All ships, you're about to hear something new. Don't try to understand it, just feel it. Let the music guide your movements." Suddenly, the ship's speakers filled with the sound of jazz music. But this wasn't recorded music. It was being played live by human musicians scattered throughout the fleet. The music started slow and simple, but quickly became complex. Different instruments took turns leading, creating patterns that emerged and dissolved without warning. There was structure, but it was loose and flowing. "All ships follow the music," Rachel ordered. "When the drums get faster, increase speed. When the trumpet leads, change direction. Don't think about it, just react. Nick felt foolish at first, but then something clicked. The music wasn't random at all. It had rhythms and themes, but they changed constantly. As the saxophone took over from the piano, he found himself adjusting course without conscious thought. Around him, the human fleet moved like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Ships would group together during a strong bass line, then scatter when the music became light and airy. They attacked during loud sections and retreated during quiet ones. The Skarn swarms, expecting logical tactical responses, found themselves facing something impossible to predict. How could you counter a military formation based on improvised music? Dr. Amy Carter, monitoring from Luna Station, watched the battle with amazement. The Skarn coordination is completely disrupted, she reported. They're trying to analyze the pattern, but there isn't one. Every musician is improvising within the overall structure. On the surface of Wolf 359's third planet, Sergeant Maria Lopez led a ground assault against a Skarn biofactory. Her team included humans and several alien volunteers who had agreed to try the new tactics. Remember, she told her mixed squad, don't follow the plan too closely. When the music changes, change with it. The squad moved through the alien city with their communication devices tuned to the same jazz broadcast the fleet was using. When a trumpet solo began, they rushed forward. During a quiet drum section, they crept silently through shadows. The Skarn ground forces, adapted to counter conventional military tactics, found themselves unable to predict where the next attack would come from. Their hive mind worked overtime trying to process movement patterns based on musical improvisation. Lieutenant Commander Nick Hayes found himself in a dogfight with 6 Skarn fighters. In the old days, he would have followed standard evasion patterns. Instead, he listened to a wild guitar solo and let it guide his ship through a series of rolls and dives that defied all logic. The Skarn fighters, trying to anticipate his moves based on previous human behavior, kept firing at empty space. Their coordination broke down as the hive mind received contradictory data about human tactics. Back on the flagship, Rachel watched the battle turn in their favor. The Council fleet, seeing human success, tried to copy the musical approach. But they were too rigid in their thinking. They treated the music like a code to be deciphered instead of art to be felt. Only a few alien ships managed to truly improvise. Ironically, these were crews that included human advisors who had learned to think more flexibly. Admiral, Kyle's voice came through from Luna Station. We're getting reports from all over the galaxy. Word of the musical tactics is spreading faster than official communications. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Skarn had retreated for the second time, leaving behind wreckage and confusion. But more importantly, the galaxy had learned something new about warfare. Battles could be won not just with superior firepower or better technology, but with creativity and the willingness to break all the rules. Species that had spent millennia perfecting their military doctrines were suddenly scrambling to understand concepts like improvisation and artistic expression. Military academies across the galaxy began hiring human instructors to teach courses on chaos theory and combat. The Vorthak Collective, who had dismissed humans as primitive farmers, now studied human music with the intensity they usually reserved for quantum physics. The Mantis Hierarchy, proud warriors who had never lost a battle until they met the Skarn, began learning to dance. As Rachel watched the alien ships limping back to their bases, she realized something important had changed. Earth was no longer the backwater world begging for mining rights. They had become the species others turned to when the impossible needed to be accomplished. But the real change was yet to come. Military tactics were just the beginning. If humans could revolutionize how the galaxy fought, maybe they could change how it thought about everything else. Ambassador Kyle Martinez sat in what used to be a storage room on the Galactic Council station, but was now humanity's unofficial embassy. He was sharing tea with 3 very different beings who, 6 months ago, would never have been in the same room together. Veltar was a Vorthak engineer whose crystal body shifted between blue and green when he was thinking. Whisper of Stars was a Zephyrian poet whose metallic jellyfish form hummed softly when she was happy. The third was Clicth, a mantis warrior whose golden carapace bore scars from a dozen battles. This is most unusual, Veltar said, his crystals flickering nervously. In proper diplomatic protocol, different species meet only through official channels. Whisper of Stars made a sound like wind chimes. My people's songs speak of harmony between different voices. But we never thought to try singing with others. Kyle smiled and poured more tea. This was exactly what he had hoped would happen. On Earth, we call this getting to know each other. It's not official business. Just friends talking. The concept was foreign to them, but that was the point. The Galactic Council had operated for thousands of years on rigid hierarchy and formal procedures. Every interaction was official. Every conversation followed protocols that were older than human civilization. But Kyle had learned something during Earth's brief time in galactic politics. The beings who made the big decisions were individuals with their own hopes, fears, and dreams. They had just forgotten how to express them. The informal gatherings had started small. Kyle would invite 1 or 2 aliens to share human food and tell stories about their home worlds. At first, they were suspicious and formal. But gradually, something changed. Kyle, Clicketh said, using the human's first name instead of his formal title. Your species approaches problems differently than ours. When we faced the Skarn, we tried to fight them the way we always fight. You made music into warfare. We didn't have a choice, Kyle said. Our weapons aren't as good as yours. Our ships aren't as fast. We had to find a different way. But how did you know it would work? Whisper of Stars asked. Kyle thought about that. We didn't. But sometimes not knowing what's impossible makes it possible to try impossible things. On Earth, Senator Claire Davis was having a similar conversation with President Mary Thompson. They sat in the Oval Office reviewing reports from human diplomats throughout the galaxy. The informal meetings are spreading, Claire said. We've got humans hosting gatherings on 12 different worlds now. Species that haven't talked in centuries are starting to communicate. What's the Council's official response? President Thompson asked. They're confused. This isn't how diplomacy is supposed to work. Some of the older species are calling it dangerous chaos. The president smiled. Good. Sometimes dangerous chaos is exactly what you need. The breakthrough came during what Dr. Tony Kim later called the Night of Many Voices. Dr. Kim was a xenobiologist who had been studying how different species communicated. He had noticed that each alien race had art forms that expressed their deepest cultural values. What if we combined them? He had suggested to Kyle. Not mixing them together, but letting each species share their art while others listened. The event took place in the station's main assembly hall, which had never been used for anything but formal council meetings. Kyle had somehow gotten permission to host a cultural exchange, though he suspected. The council approved it only because they didn't understand what it meant. What happened that night changed. Everything, Whisper of Stars, began with a traditional Zephyrian song poem about the birth of stars. Her metallic form glowed and pulsed as she sang in frequencies that touched emotions no human had words for. The assembled beings, representing dozens of species, listened in silence. Then a mantis warrior named Sharpblade performed a hunting dance that told the story of his people's evolution from prey to predator. His movements were precise and deadly, but also beautiful in their controlled power. A group of Vorthak engineers created a crystal sculpture that grew and changed as they worked, showing how their species had learned to shape their environment through collective thought. But the real magic happened when species began responding to each other's art. A young Zephyrian started harmonizing with a mantis war chant. Vorthak crystals began pulsing in rhythm with human music. Art forms that had developed in isolation for millions of years suddenly found common ground. Kyle watched from the side of the hall as barriers that had existed for millennia began to crumble. For the first time in galactic history, different species weren't just coexisting or competing. They were collaborating. The Council's response was predictably negative. Fleet Commander Zethkar called an emergency session the next day. Ambassador Martinez, he said, his crystal form flashing angry red colors. Your cultural exchange violated numerous protocols. Different species are not supposed to interact without proper supervision. Why not? Kyle asked. The question seemed to surprise the Vorthak commander. Because it has always been this way. Each species maintains its own identity and follows its proper role. What if the proper roles aren't working anymore? Around the council chamber, representatives from dozens of species shifted uncomfortably. This was exactly the kind of dangerous thinking they had been taught to avoid. But Kyle wasn't finished. The Skarn are still out there. Your old ways of fighting them aren't working. Your old ways of working together aren't stopping them from destroying entire star systems. The Skarn are a military problem, said the Mantis representative. It has nothing to do with cultural exchange. Dr. Amy Carter's voice came through the communication system from Earth. Actually, it has everything to do with it. I've been analyzing Skarn behavior patterns, and I think I know why they're so effective against you. The council chamber fell silent. Amy's research on the Skarn had saved the Wolf 359 system, so even the most conservative aliens listened when she spoke. The Skarn operate as a true collective consciousness, Amy continued. But they're not just a military force. They're an entire civilization that thinks as one mind. When they encounter other civilizations, they try to understand them by breaking them down into predictable patterns. Your point? Zethkar asked. The Galactic Council has made itself predictable. Every species has its role. Every response follows the same patterns. The Skarn have had thousands of years to study you, and they know exactly what you're going to do. Kyle picked up the explanation. But when species start working together in new ways, when they share ideas and create new solutions, they become unpredictable again. Chaos, said the Mantis representative dismissively. Innovation, Kyle corrected. On Earth we have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. You've been so successful for so long that you forgot how to invent new solutions. The debate continued for hours. Conservative species argued for maintaining traditional boundaries. Progressive species, mostly younger civilizations, began to see the value in human approaches. But the real change happened outside the council chambers. The cultural exchange had planted seeds throughout the galaxy. Species that had been isolated for millennia began reaching out to each other. A Vorthak trade ship started carrying Zephyrian artists to share their music with other worlds. Mantis warriors began studying human military tactics not as rigid doctrine, but as examples of creative thinking. Young aliens from dozens of species applied to study at the new innovation centers that Earth established on frontier worlds. The transformation wasn't uniform or easy. Many species resisted change, clinging to traditions that had served them well in the past, but others began to experiment with cooperation and creative problem-solving. 6 months after the cultural exchange, Kyle received a message that made him smile. It was from a joint scientific station where Vorthak engineers, Zephyrian artists, Mantis strategists, and human researchers were working together on a project that none of them could have completed alone. They were building something that had never existed before, a weapon designed not to destroy the Skarn, but to communicate with them. Kyle, came Veltar's message, we think we understand something important. The Skarn aren't evil. They're afraid. And fear makes even the wisest beings do terrible things. Kyle leaned back in his chair and looked out at the stars. The galaxy was changing, one friendship at a time. Species that had been strangers were becoming allies. Civilizations that had stagnated were learning to grow again, but the biggest change was still coming. If they could learn to understand their enemies instead of just fighting them, maybe they could transform the entire nature of galactic civilization. The Skarn War was about to become something completely different, an opportunity for peace. Captain Lisa Brooks stood on the bridge of the New Horizons, now the flagship of the largest cooperative fleet in galactic history. Around her ship, vessels from 23 different species moved in formations that would have been impossible just 2 years ago. Vorthak crystal ships flew alongside Mantis war cruisers. Zephyrian bioships pulsed in harmony with human destroyers, and scattered throughout the fleet were new hybrid designs, ships built by multiple species working together. Captain, called Lieutenant Commander Nick Hayes from the navigation station, we're approaching the coordinates Dr. Carter provided. The Skarn origin point should be just ahead, Lisa nodded. After months of detective work, Dr. Amy Carter and her multi-species research team had traced the Skarn back to their source. What they found there would change everything. Any sign of Skarn forces? Lisa asked. Negative, reported the tactical officer, a Mantis warrior named Swift Strike. But I'm detecting massive energy readings from the system's edge. Something big is out there. On Earth, President Mary Thompson sat in the Situation Room with her staff, watching the live feed from the fleet. This mission represented everything humanity had worked toward since first contact. Success would mean peace. Failure could mean the end of galactic civilization. Ma'am, said General Peter Ross, are we sure this is the right approach? We could have brought enough firepower to sterilize that entire system. That's exactly why we're not doing it, the President replied. If Amy's theory is correct, violence is what started this whole conflict. The theory had emerged from the joint research station Kyle Martinez had helped establish. Working together, scientists from multiple species had analyzed every piece of Skarn technology they could find. The conclusion was startling. The Skarn weren't conquerors. They were refugees. Dr. Amy Carter's voice came through the communication system from the research vessel Discovery. Lisa, I'm detecting the energy signature now. It's massive, but it's not weapons. It's some kind of barrier or shield. Can we get through it? Lisa asked. Maybe, but not by force. The barrier seems to be designed to keep something out, not to keep us from getting in. Kyle Martinez, now serving as the fleet's chief negotiator, joined the conversation from his ship. Amy, what if we try communicating instead of forcing our way through? The idea was typically human. When faced with a locked door, try knocking first, Engineer Ben Phillips, working aboard a joint human Vorthak research ship, had been studying Skarn communication methods for months. I think I can modify our transmission array to match their collective frequency, he reported. But I'll need help from the Zephyrian bioships. Their living communication systems might be able to interface with the Skarn hive mind. It took 6 hours to set up the communication array. Ships from different species linked their systems together in ways that had never been attempted. The result was a transmission method that combined human creativity, Vorthak engineering precision, Zephyrian biological interfaces, and Mantis tactical coordination. When they finally sent the message, it was simple. We want to understand. The response was immediate. The massive energy barrier began to fluctuate, and openings appeared like doorways of light. They're inviting us in, Amy said, her voice filled with wonder. The fleet moved through the barrier slowly, carefully. What they found on the other side took their breath away. The system contained not planets but massive structures that looked like cities built in space. Each structure was kilometers long and housed millions of beings. But these weren't the Skarn ships they had fought. These looked older, more fragile, like refugee camps built to last for centuries. Captain, Swift Strike reported, I'm detecting billions of life signs. This isn't a military base. It's a civilization. A transmission came from the largest structure. But unlike the coordinated hive mind communications they were used to, this signal was chaotic, filled with individual voices speaking at once. Amy worked frantically to decode the message. They're not all connected, she said. The hive mind is breaking down. They're becoming individuals again. The voice that finally came through clearly was unlike any Skarn communication they had heard before. It was filled with emotion, fear, and hope. You are the Chaos Bringers, it said. The ones who fight with music and art. We have watched you change the galaxy. Kyle stepped forward to respond. We've come to understand. Why are you attacking inhabited systems? The answer that came back explained everything. The Skarn had fled their home galaxy millions of years ago, escaping something they called the Great Silence. It was a force that consumed not just worlds or species, but entire ways of thinking. It turned diversity into uniformity, creativity into rigid order. We became one mind to survive, the Skarn voice explained. But unity became prison. We could not remember how to be individuals. When we found your galaxy, we saw the same patterns that led to the Great Silence. Rigid order, unchanging traditions. We thought we had to consume or transform everything before the silence found us again. Dr. Amy Carter made the connection first. The Galactic Council, she said. You saw their rigid hierarchies and predictable behaviors, and you thought they were being influenced by this Great Silence. Yes. We tried to free them by absorbing them into our collective. We thought unity was the only defense, but you were wrong, Kyle said gently. The defense against uniformity isn't more uniformity. It's diversity. It's chaos. It's the kind of beautiful mess that happens when different species work together. What followed was the most complex negotiation in galactic history. The Skarn collective began to fragment as individuals remembered how to think independently. Some wanted to continue the war, believing that order inevitably led to the Great Silence. Others wanted to try coexistence. Ben Phillips, working with Veltar and Whisper of Stars, developed a solution that only a multi-species team could have created. They built communication networks that allowed former Skarn collective members to choose their level of connection. Some remained in small group minds. Others became completely individual. Many chose something in between. The process took months. There were setbacks, conflicts, and moments when it seemed like the fragile peace would collapse. But slowly, something unprecedented began to emerge. Individual Skarn began to integrate into galactic society. Their knowledge of biotechnology revolutionized medicine. Their understanding of collective consciousness helped species coordinate in ways they never thought possible. And their experience with the Great Silence became a warning that helped the galaxy stay diverse and creative. 5 years after first contact, Kyle Martinez stood in the assembly hall of what was now called the Cooperative Commonwealth. The old Galactic Council had been replaced by something more flexible, more creative, and more chaotic. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered not in rigid hierarchies, but in fluid groups that changed based on the issues being discussed. Former enemies worked together on joint projects. Art and science flowed freely between worlds. The plaque at the entrance to the Commonwealth Assembly read, "Earth was a backwater world, until the galaxy learned that sometimes the best solutions come from the most unexpected places." But Kyle knew the real lesson was deeper than that. Humanity hadn't saved the galaxy by being superior to other species. They had saved it by showing everyone that differences were strengths, that chaos could create order, and that cooperation was more powerful than domination. Captain Lisa Brooks, now an admiral in the Commonwealth Defense Force, commanded fleets where human intuition worked alongside Vorthak logic, Mantis warrior spirit, Zephyrian artistic vision, and even reformed Skarn collective knowledge. Dr. Amy Carter established research stations throughout the galaxy where scientists from dozens of species worked together to understand the universe. Her greatest discovery was that diversity itself was a fundamental force of nature, as important as gravity or electromagnetism, and in the deepest reaches of space, monitoring stations watched for signs of the Great Silence. If it ever came to this galaxy, it would find not a collection of predictable, rigid civilizations, but a chaotic, creative, adaptive community that had learned the most important lesson in the universe. Differences don't divide us. They make us stronger. Earth was no longer a backwater world. It had become the beating heart of a galactic civilization that celebrated chaos, embraced change, and proved that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't order or disorder, but the beautiful complexity that emerged when different voices learned to sing together. The galaxy had learned to be human. And in doing so, it had learned to be truly alive.